Hello and welcome to a special edition of Flat Earth and Other Hot Potatoes, QED. QED means quote erat demonstratum. And please excuse my butchered Latin pronunciation. It means what was to be demonstrated. And we are going to demonstrate for you something that has been a huge bone of contention on YouTube for quite some time. Is the Earth a sphere, as we've been told, or is it measurably flat? This is a panel show, and we are going to be having several guests here. The team that's on Nathan Oakley 1980s channel, the Flat Earth Debate team. There are other members that are not here, but we have some here for us. And they are Nathan Oakley, of course, from the Nathan Oakley 1980 channel. We have Chris Monk-Seeley here as well, Anthony Riley from the Sleeping Warrior channel, and Shane Cook from the channel Ranty! Gentlemen, thank you for being here today with me.
Good to be here. Thanks for having us.
Nice to be here.
Morning.
Not morning for me, maybe morning for someone. It's evening in the UK, and in Houston, Texas, where I am, it's 5:11 p.m. So, well, this show is going to be probably heavily trolled, and I have many moderators in the chat that will take care of anyone who wants to use profanity or make fun of any of the points that are to be brought to the table. However, critical commentary is always allowed, so feel free, no matter what your belief is, to converse among yourselves. Just remember to be polite. Let's talk to Anthony Riley first. Anthony, can you tell us what this panel show is meant to show?
We're going to be showing conclusive evidence that the Earth does not have any sphericity to it whatsoever. We're going to be showing that the Earth is flat, and we're going to be showing that it's repeatably, demonstrably, evidently, and conclusively flat. And it's quite unique because the distances involved are so vast that it removes all elements of doubt, and it really is, it speaks for itself. It stands in its own footprint, it stands on its own merits, and everybody can do it. You just need a clear day, and that's it. That's really all it is.
Thank you, Anthony. And now, Nathan, please tell us a little bit more about the Flat Earth Debates channel. Not everyone knows about it, and the aim that you have with having the Flat Earth Debates going.
Okay. Don't know what to tell you, really. The debates channel was set up so that it was less of a circle jerk, if that's the right terminology. Basically, so there was a dialogue back and forth between the Globers and the Flat Earthers, so that there could hopefully be some progress made in the way that it ended up happening. You know, so there has been progress made by Globers, at least at the end, literally agreeing with us that Google Earth is not a accurate or a representative model for Earth. So they were basically doing that towards the end, which is kind of what you would hope for on a debate channel about the shape of the Earth. So it was quite beautiful in that way. But yeah, it was to bring it back onto QED. It was the case that, I don't know, about the 65 show, 66 show, something like that, Anthony approached me and explained that Ranty had basically got a video that he had taken back in October, when he and I had been discussing Anthony actually finding curvature, or so he thought. And he said, well, what do you think of this evidence? And he basically laid it out fairly candidly and just asked me my opinion. And I thought it was excellent. It seemed like a win-win piece of evidence. And Anthony and I discussed how to sort of put it forward on the debates channel. And that's exactly what happened. But rather than letting it be a complete free-for-all in terms of how the conversations would roll, I made that sort of decision at that stage that it would be better to actually keep the conversations on track, because Anthony had such a fantastic piece of flat Earth evidence. And the reason it was so fantastic was because the main debating point, this land on the left-hand side of the image, was a win-win. It was always something way beyond the curvature. And I don't want to steal Anthony's thunder in terms of telling some of the stories, but there was moments along the way where the Globers were giving us fantastic pieces of evidence. And you know, later Chris will tell you about the Morgord lighthouse, which was identified by a Glober. you know, and pointed out to us in terms of how much rocks there should be below it and all these sorts of things. And ultimately speaking, it was way, way, way beyond the curvature. In other words, beyond a wall of earth curve. And this got played out for everyone to see while it was sort of being, or attempted to be, debunked live. And that's quite unique, or at least I think it is. But it meant that the proof was vetted, you know, very heavily vetted. You know, peer-reviewed got batted around. I don't know if you could extend that sort of title to it, but it was certainly very, very well vetted. Towards the end, by the cream of the crop of the globers, the people who want to, you know, not even globers, that's a terrible term to use, really. The anti-flat Earth proponents out there, which is what they are, you know, they're anti-flat Earth, and they are small in number. But yeah, they're a minority far beyond flat Earth, even the anti-flat Earth people that we have on the show. But yeah, they tried to debunk Anthony Riley's video. And to say succinctly what we were doing, we were looking at a video and identifying what was on it. Simple as that. Saying, here's what's on the video. This is this landmark. This is that landmark. And as a flat earther, it was dead easy. You just literally identified stuff, and that was it. For a glober, you had to believe in all sorts of fantastical stuff to look at the image. It was ridiculous. You know, towards the end, it became a farce. We had a commenter called "slightly looming non-standard refraction hyena," and it was just a farce to make a joke of the kind of rubbish that they had to come up with to explain seeing Ireland at 145 miles. But yeah, that's my sort of condensed version of this particular proof. I mean, the thing I'm really keen to get onto is Anthony telling you about how he took the image.
All right, we'll get to that in a moment, but I want to talk with Chris Monk-Seeley, who I've not had on my show yet, but I hope, Chris, to interview you soon. For those who aren't familiar with you, the very few that aren't, can you tell us where you live and how you got wrangled into all of this?
Sure, yeah. I'm from Canada, and I'm a basically retired Canadian Welding Bureau level 2 inspector, and worked on major projects for 20 odd years of my construction career, and so familiar with drafting and design, and had to do a lot of things, surveying and everything else that's in as far as being on major projects. You have to kind of be a jack of all trades. So I was a multidiscipline inspector for civil, mechanical, piping, welding, and anything to do with building major projects. That's kind of where I came into it. And as far as how I came into this project, Anthony he said, "Hey, I got this footage, and this is what we think, and could you have a look?" And I said, "Well, sure. I'll throw it into a 3D model and put things to their proper coordinates and locations and elevations, and just see what it looks like." So that's really all I did, was put it into a ball model and see what it should look like as compared to the video footage.
And some of the graphics that we're seeing on the screen, Chris, are you responsible for that?
Yeah, this is a 3D wireframe model of basically, I'll zoom out a little bit and you can see it is Earth, basically, to scale.
We don't have you on screen at the moment, Chris, if you can.
No, she's on about the avatar that's on Skype with circles.
Yes, I was just wondering if what we're seeing is something that Chris created.
Yeah, it's just a screen grab I grabbed from the model there that shows the Isle of Man with the camera looking at it. Yeah.
Okay, great. I do want to say hello to Ranty, who I interviewed yesterday, episode number 208 of Flat Earth and Other Hot Potatoes. And on that show, we got to meet you and find out more about the man behind the Ranty exclamation point channel. But for those who didn't see that and don't know you, Ranty, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and what qualifies you to be somebody involved in the Flat Earth debates and here on this panel right now to show everyone that we don't live on a sphere?
Well, I'm just somebody that's looking for answers, basically. I came across Flat Earth about 8 or 9 months ago, and since then I've been fascinated with it. And I think within the first week or two, I'd bought my first P900 and went out and did my own observations. And that's how I got to meet Anthony, by doing some observations of Blackpool Tower. We found that we were trying to prove the Flat Earth by using Blackpool Tower as a reference point, and decided to work together from that. And I think since then we've collaborated on many an observation, and I think we talk every day on Skype. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Ranty. Shane Cook, by the way, his real name. Let's turn things over to Anthony Riley. But before we begin and get to the heart of the matter, I want to know and let everyone know what equipment has been used to put this together.
Well, it started off with the P900, and then from there, lots of computer equipment in terms of software. They've been manipulated to death. We've been playing with contrast, the brightness. We've been applying the pictures. Instead of being a flat image, we put them on a curve, like a curved screen monitor, and trying to get accuracy for what we're doing. And it's just been crazy, the amount of man hours that we've put into this, because me and Nathan have been batting them off in the debates channel for probably 30 or so debate shows at 2 hours ago. Because I stand by my words. It appears that we have Ireland, and it was the case that we wanted to show that. So I stood my ground, and I stood my ground on all points. And it was literally a case of the software that we were using to try and get the accurate information from the image was quite extensive at times. We were tinkering all the time. So it's a mix of like Photoshop with Ranty, Premiere Pro. Chris has got his own software. But the hardware was just the P900. That was it. But I needed other people, because when I caught the footage, I was on holiday at the time. It was literally a case of, right, I'm looking for something specific. Can't see it. The weather's not quite good enough to the south. But right in front of me, I've got something that's a gift here. I'll just record this because I'm here. But to answer the question, it was just hardware, P900. Everything else became hardware in terms of the computer, what software on it. And the manpower that went into it was quite extensive. So it wasn't straightforward. And on my own, I would never have been able to do it. That's why it became a 4-person effort. It was literally a team. It wasn't easy. We spent a lot of time on it. And we've argued. We really have argued. There's been times when we interpret stuff and I'll say, that's not strong. And somebody else will say, yes, it is. And I'll say, no, it's not. It doesn't match. Yes, it does. And it'll go back and forth like this. And there'll be rage quits and stuff like that. And that's made us stronger in the long run. We've literally stood back and looked back at it and smiled, and we sit back now, and we're putting our feet up now. As far as we're concerned, the debate side of it's over. This hasn't been debunked. It's gone 30 shows, so it's strong. And the peer review point is important too, because all these guys on the ball side, at the end of the day, these are our peers. So whether they're peers of credibility or not isn't really the point. They are our peers, and that is the point of peer review. Okay, it's peer review on Flat Earth, but nonetheless, it is peer review. So although it seems a little bit trivial, it's actually strong, because them guys haven't been able to debunk this. It still stands. They all claim that somebody's debunked it, but nobody's actually debunked it, and it still stands to this day. It stands in its own footprint, on its own merits. So
for those who don't know, the places, there's point A, the Isle of Man, and point B, Ireland, I would imagine. And correct me if I'm wrong. And the distance between is how much?
If I share my screen so you can, I've got it all prepped. We're good to go.
Yes. All right. Well, let's begin then. I just want people to know the 2 points that we're talking about and how much distance there is.
Okay. So can you guys see my screen in Skype?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So obviously me, Ranty, Nathan all live in the UK. For those of you that are not based in the UK, it's just good to have a little bit of overview. Originally, but this is where I'm from. I'm from the Liverpool area. And originally I was looking at Blackpool Tower. So I'd done observations from different places, and I could see Blackpool Tower from 30 miles away. So I was pushing the boat out. Literally it's from here. I was pushing the boat out to 50 miles to see if I could see it. Now on the day in question, it was a bit misty over here, so I couldn't see it as much. But I had this thing sat right in front of me, this big massive island called the Isle of Man. And literally it was the case of, I could see land from about here, across that line of sight to about there. And that's basically what I recorded. Maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, but we're talking around this area somewhere. So we're looking right across the Isle of Man, and we can see land. Now on the day in question, it was the day, give or take a day or so, when the MGTV video came out, where Mark was claimed to be the owner of a website, and Patricia went live, and Ranty came on and said Mark Sargent did not own that website on that day. It was on or around that date. And essentially, I rang Ranty, who was also on holiday in Scotland at the time, and I said, look, I think I've got Ireland in this footage. And he said, well, no way, it's too far. And when you look at it, I mean, the nearest line of sight to Ireland is 70 miles away, 76 miles. But I got a very, very clear day, really clear. Now, when I say really clear, it was crisp. Normally, when you get a clear day, you say, yeah, I might be able to see a bit further today. This particular day was very, very clear. There's very little moisture in the atmosphere. And moisture, when you're looking over long distance, is effectively a cloud. You're looking in water. And that's why we don't get visibility at infinitely distant. You hear people on the ball earth side saying, why can't you see from New York to Paris? And the answer is because there's moisture in the way. If you were to remove all the moisture, then you would see it, but you'd have to have mega zoom. And obviously one of the going gags in the conversation was that if you had enough zoom and a clear enough day, if you're on a ball, you should see all the way around the ball to see your own arse in a telescope. Because that was one of the gags that we had to use to make the point that it was ridiculous that we were seeing so far. But nonetheless, I could see this, the line of sight I could see was this, and I'm looking right the way behind the Isle of Man here, and it was up here somewhere. So we're looking across this line of sight, and the visibility was fantastic. So all I did was I got my P900, and I went and stood on a hill. And I think the best thing to do right now is just to play the clip and just talk through it. I mean, literally, I was at the top of this little hill looking out, and I'm in touristy mode. I'd gone up to see Blackpool Tower, and I couldn't see it. And I could see this in the background. And I thought, well, from where I am here, this is fantastic. I'll literally just record what I see for posterity's sake. And then a couple of days, you know, when I go home, I'll get on the computer and I'll just see what I can see. And that's all I did. I mean, I wasn't expecting anything out of it. I didn't take GPS coordinates. I didn't take proof of elevation or angular size or anything to do with anything like that. I just took it because I thought there might be something interested in this, but probably won't be, but there might be. So this is the film. This is the actual film that was taken on the day. And that's the Isle of Man in front of me. But what's interesting is this is where it gets a little bit interesting, because the Isle of Man appears to stop and then it lips back on itself a little bit. And there's a town here called Ramsey, and we can't even see it, but there is a town there. So as the clip plays, this is where it gets a little bit psychedelic for me, because I got to this part here and I'm stood on my little hill and I'm looking across and I'm thinking, what on earth is that? Now, I'm good with my geography. I knew my geography. I knew that what I was looking at here was, it's kind of like, that's the bit where Ramsey is. And I've gone past that and I'm looking at somewhere along this line of sight. I don't know exactly the bearing, but I knew that what I'm looking at here was this kind of area. So I'm looking at this land, but this land is not doing what I expected it to do. It was very, very difficult to focus on. The camera was struggling with focus, and this thing was like, it was changing. The way it was appearing to me was like a heat haze. And the best way I can describe it is, imagine when you get up in the winter and you've got condensation on the inside of your glass. You get the back of your hand and you rub a hole in the condensation so you can peep through it. That's exactly what I was looking at. It looked like I was getting like a letterbox through the atmosphere where it was just better visibility. And I could tell by the way the camera was behaving that it was struggling. Whatever this was, it was really far away. And you can also see that there's a little patch of like light blue along the underside of it. That also told me it was far away, because whatever's going on here, the camera's struggling, I'm struggling, and I'm watching it change in very eyes. And I knew it was like a mirage or something. It was something weird. So I'll keep playing the clip, and I'm looking for things that are of interest. And I'm just trying to see what the camera can do. But there's artifacts in here that became really contentious. Like, obviously, there's a boat in the picture now, and you can see a speckling plane flying by in the background. So I'm thinking, right, that boat must be in the middle of the Irish Sea. So in terms of what I'm looking at now, I'm thinking the boat's somewhere along this line of sight, and the boat's passing between the Isle of Man and Scotland, and the boat's somewhere in this line of sight. So this is what I think I'm looking at. So obviously the clip then can continue, and you can see this. There's the plane. You can see a plane flying by in the background. Now, I mean, that could be anywhere, but this cliff face became really prominent because this formed a big part of the scale argument, because the scale matters. Whatever we're looking at, you've got to pick landmarks out that you can line your scale up with, and then you can work out your angle of observation. You can work out your field of view. You can work out what you're looking at, and this became really, really a key landmark. And it formed a big part of the discussion, and still does to some degree. But we can see that there's proper land here. This is not low-lying land. This is land that clearly is behind this boat. So wherever this boat is, is going to give you an idea that, and for me, my position was that the boat's somewhere in amongst this line of sight here, and we're looking at the land that's behind here somewhere. This is the angle of sight that we're looking at. But again, it's 78 miles away. So, but it was a crystal clear day. It wasn't the normal kind of day. It was better than average visibility. So the clip continues, and we get to the end of what is the land. I don't see any more land after that. So I start panning backwards, and I'm struggling. I'm really struggling to see this. I can feel the blood pumping in my fingers, and I can feel that the blood pumping in my fingers is making the camera move. That's how prominent it was. Now, if you look carefully, you may even, the keener-eyed people should even see when I zoom back out. You may not do. It depends on whether I can catch it at the right time. No, maybe not. Now, I am on digital zoom at this point, and that's why it's a bit blurry. But there's actually a stack here, a chimney stack or a smoke stack. You don't see, it's not clear on this particular video at this point, but there's smoke coming out of it. And there's a couple more stacks to the left that have got smoke coming out of it too. And I'm thinking, what on earth is that? So I can see this in my viewfinder, and I can see it on my screen now. You guys may not see it in the Hangout, but when you start optimizing and playing with the contrast and playing with the brightness, you can see it. There's a chimney stack or a smoke stack at least there. And we're looking at industry. We're looking at a boat. We're looking at some kind of thing like Landwise or whatever. This is crazy. So I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, this is astonishing. So as time goes by, I'm getting to the point now where, right, okay, we're pretty much finished with this. So this is where I'm thinking I need to speak to Ranty. So as we zoom out now, we're pretty much at the end of the clip. And this is what was released. And I showed this and said, this appears to be Scotland or Ireland, but it's not Isle of Man. Now, what's most interesting is right at the very, very beginning of the clip, we looked right the way down to the far left-hand side. And I just want to show this because it forms the main part of the discussion. I mean, as I go down to the left-hand side of the island, I'm hoping that I do it now. Here we go. The land tapers off to about this point here. And hang on, let's just play this. The issue became, what is all the land? So we had to all start dealing with the land that was in the screen, in the shot. So literally, it was a case of what items can we pick out? So I rang Ranty and I just said, okay, Ranty, this is what I got. Let's see it. So I'm gonna pass you over to Ranty now, and he can talk through what he did. So what we could work out what we were looking at. It's quite incredible. So Ranty, if you're there, do you want to screen share and present?
Yeah, just let me
unlock
get my screen share up. Not yet. Just keep yours on for a minute. Okay.
Stop mine. Yeah, I'm off.
Okay, yeah. So essentially, I had the same clip ready to play. And basically what we're going to be focusing on is the southern part of the Isle of Man. Because this is, obviously, you've got some very clear landmarks that you can identify along this landmass. As you pan across to the north, as Anthony was trying to explain just then, it's very ambiguous as to what you can actually see. It does look very misty and hazy in this area. It could be some kind of localized weather that's perhaps in the way. However, the southern part was much clearer. So what I decided to do was take a bunch of screenshots and piece together what Anthony had actually seen on that particular day and make a composite picture up. So starting in the north, which was up here, as you can see, it's very indistinct. You can't make out hardly anything on this particular landmass. However, when the further south you go, it seems to get clearer. Apart from this area here, where you can see a little bit of miraging happening here, the rest seems to be pretty clear until you get to the very far end. So as we scroll through, this was the original composite that we were working with. Well, actually, this was composite 3, but it was the one that hadn't had any alterations done to it with the contrast and color and all that kind of stuff, brightness. So as we're scrolling along, you can see things. You can see all kinds of different lights. You can see different terrain. Of course, that gets a lot easier when you're when you actually get the right settings with this. So the next image that we managed to get was, okay, so, well, here's Langness, sorry, not Langness, this is Moorgold Lighthouse. So just to give you an idea on the composite, this was the image that we actually pulled out. And as you can see, there's the lighthouse, which is here. And here you have the quarters which the lighthouse keeper will have lived in. Okay, and it's actually, it's without question, and everybody agrees that this is the landmark that we're looking at for the actual lighthouse. So once we knew where that was, which on the composite is right over here in this corner. So there's the lighthouse. Okay, and that is, I believe it is about 31 miles away. And then the total span from this lighthouse here to this part here on the map is 21 miles. So what you're actually effectively looking at is this is the closest part on the right, which is this lighthouse. And then you have 21 miles of terrain going further and further away from you till you get to this point here. And I can show you that on Google Earth as we scroll out. And this is where Anthony took his observation from here. So this is the first lighthouse on the right. And then we come across the different land masses to the furthest point here, which is actually 51.2 miles away. But the span of the image that we're looking at today is 21 miles. So going back to the composite, this was the original one we worked with. And then this was the middle one, is the one that had all the individual images brought out. The contrast, the color, and the lightness was all changed. And eventually we managed to find a sweet spot where we could identify individual things like ridges and coves and hills going down the side. For instance, what broke the whole image wide open was this particular hill here. And you can note the blackness on the top and the scale of it. And you can also see the village, which is here on Google Earth as we scroll in, and is here on the image. Another part of the village is here and here, two little buildings that are here. And this is the start of the hill, which is here. And as we scroll across the map, come across, we follow the hill down, we're following the hill down, and we come to another little town here. I've actually just blocked it off because it was easier to find on the map through this. And basically this lines up with these buildings here. And as you can see, the terrain matches. You've got some erosion on the map here where it's more of a sand. I'll show you on Google Earth. It's more sandy as the erosion's taken place here and here. And you've got some of the coves that are quite distinct. And there's the houses on the hill, for instance, here. So going back again to the image, there's the houses on the hill. Here's all the erosion and stuff going down. There's the cove that comes around here. And eventually we end up with different land masses coming across. The hills match up in the background, as you can see. The hills all match up. Come across, we end up over here, and we end up in Douglas. So this area here is the main city in the Isle of Man, which I will show you here. It's here. This is the main city, and it has some distinct buildings on the hill here, some rather large buildings. And it's also in the line of sight. It's actually a fair way over. If you look at the line of sight, you can see how far across it is here. And that last little dot on the end here is the furthest left of the island that we can actually see. What we have on there is a lighthouse, and it's called Langness Lighthouse, and it's quite distinct. I'll show you an image of it and show you it on the composite. This was the composite image that we brought out. I'll show it in a minute. And this is Langness Lighthouse. As you can see, they're identical. There's absolutely no doubt that this is Langness Lighthouse. And I'll show you on the composite now. So this is in Douglas, and we come across, there's the end of the Isle of Man on Google Earth. And as we scroll into the end of the composite, we come up to this Langness Lighthouse, which is here. This is also the golf course. There's a golf course here, which is here, this building here. And so now that we've showed you the entire map, actually I'll show you some of the landmarks on it as well, which are written out. 21 miles from left to right. That's 31.8 miles away, this lighthouse on the right, or Moorcold Lighthouse. Langness Lighthouse on the left is 51.2 miles away. Then we have, obviously, we've got the golf club here, golf building. Then we've got Ballaga on the hill here. Obviously, the hill matches up. There's no doubt that this is the terrain that we're actually looking at. But what we also found was that in the image, we had all this extra land behind Langness Lighthouse, and far, far further than Google Earth shows you where the Isle of Man ends, which is here, and where the Langness Lighthouse is. So as there is no land behind the Isle of Man, if I show you again on the Google Earth, you will see that there is no land behind the line of sight, which only leaves one thing, and that can be that we're looking at the land beyond the Isle of Man. And I'll put a line in to show you. So coming across, we've skipped past the lighthouse, which is on the end here, and we have to keep coming and coming, going up all the way up here. So we arrive at these mountains in the background, which are roughly 140 to say 150 miles away, depending on whether you're looking from the left or the right. So if we were looking at these parts of the 143 miles, 142, as far as here to 156 miles away. So this mountain range that we're looking at in the background is what we're actually seeing behind the lighthouse here and the golfing course here. So this entire video, which started off very fuzzy and didn't show very much originally until we actually enhanced it and found out what was actually all the little nuggets that were hiding inside of it. And you can see how misty it was and how much work was needed to bring out all the detail in this. But from this piece of image here, when you look back here, and I'll just pause it there, what you're actually looking at here is Ireland that's 145 or 150 miles away. And if you didn't know what you was looking for and you didn't analyze it properly and you didn't have a P900 camera, you would never have seen this. But because technology is changing so fast, I do believe there's another camera coming out soon that will probably have a 120 times zoom, which is half as much again as the P900. It opens up a world of possibilities as to what we can actually see on a clear day, because this is all it was. It was just a clear day. We had good line of sight. There was hardly any refraction at all, especially in this area here. As you can see, there is no band of refraction at all here. And it's only when we come to the northern section that we actually start to see the weather deteriorating slightly. And I'm going to say that's localized weather, because we are looking across an expanse here of about 45 miles. So, you know, when you get to this kind of area here, this could be a different weather pattern or a weather system here. Could be affecting what you're actually seeing in this location. But clearly, as the south was much further away anyway, the fact that we could actually see all this and identify it can only lead us to believe that it is actually just one thing, and that is a flat land. If I do the curvature calculators, Anthony's elevation was give or take 52 feet or so. The distance 145 miles, let's say. The drop, basically the drop on a ball without any refraction or anything like that would have been 2.66 miles, which means that as he looks out and the horizon comes up to his eye line, those mountain ranges should have been 2.66 miles down. So he would have had to effectively look through the sea to actually see the mountains of Ireland. We didn't see that. We could actually see the mountains. And one last thing. Because he was on a hill, I'll show you the hill, which was way, way, way down here. This is a composite that I put together. You can barely see. This was the hill here next to these caravans. And what I've done is I've put Blackpool Tower next to it, then incrementally bigger buildings next to it, just to show that it doesn't matter where he was on this particular hill. He would have effectively needed all this extra height. He would have had to have been at the top of the highest building in the world, with the second highest building on the top of that to actually see Ireland. But if he was stood up there with a camera, he should have seen what we saw, well, what he saw that day. The fact that he saw it from way down here, which was virtually ground level, can only lead us to believe that it is flat. And that's all I can really say. The evidence speaks for itself. Seeing that lighthouse was the pinnacle when we was able to bring out this lighthouse here. And the design and shape of it and the location of it was absolutely in the right location, exactly where we'd expect to find it. And it was a pleasure actually working on this, even though it's been a lot of hard hours. And I know Chris has done a lot of work on it on his side too.
Thank you, Shane Cook, Ranty. I appreciate that. We all do. Now let's find out what we should be seeing on a ball from Chris Monk-Seeley. Chris?
Yeah, so what I did is I just took the data that I had available and the elevations and distances, and I put them into a ball model, a globe model, to see what we really should see here. So I'll try and share my screen and let me know if you can see it here. Right about now. Is it coming up there?
Yeah, you're good, man.
All right. So what I did is I just went in and I modeled the Mako lighthouse to its dimensions of 32 feet, 32 feet, 75 feet high, and put it 84 feet above sea level, which is that line here represented. This is the lighthouse. This is essentially the level of its foundation above sea level. Below here, once it highlights, would be the surface of the ball, Earth. And this orange part, when I highlight that for you, you'll see that this little dot here represents the camera at its elevation of about 50 feet above the surface of the water. And as we zoom back out, I'll highlight the ball here so you can see it. And you can see the dimensions and so forth. So this is a 7,918 mile diameter ball to scale. And that's the surface that the film was taken on, supposedly. And then the next step in our investigation is to put the cursor to the selected, so that we now have a center point at the center of the sphere. And everything has to be made relative to that. So then what I did in the next step of the process here was I grabbed the camera, and this is a wireframe model of the Isle of Man, and I'll show you that in a second here when I go to the top view here. And I just grabbed the camera and on its dimensions rotated it on the x-axis backwards. Let's see, right to Kershaw will zoom out a little bit. It'll be a little easier to watch it move. So there's our camera. Rotate it on the X so you can see now you're backing away, backing away from the Isle of Man until we get out to 31.5 miles, roughly, is where St. Bees is. And what you'll see in the numbers is we're at 30. Yeah, I can go back in a little bit. Don't want to labor it too much, but 31.5 miles. And it calculates the drop for you. So now you can see that you're still on the surface of the ball, but now it's negative 613 feet from where it started. So it's actually gone backwards over the curve and dropped down. So this is where you start to tell that when we go into the object mode here, and we compare that to the footage in the film, the model would clearly show that there's this wall of water between you and the object. And I can turn the Isle of Man on and off here. And when you compare that to the film, this represents the wall of water at 169 feet of bulge approximately. You can still barely see the little town behind the lighthouse that is clearly in the footage at 84 feet of sea level. And you just toggle the water on and off, and you'll see that, well, even though our lighthouse is down here, it's nowhere to be found in the footage or in the actual. It would actually be hidden by 169 feet of water between you and the lighthouse, so you should not be able to see it according to the globe model. Now, the reason we see it clearly on straight line of sight is because it's a flat line of sight. There's no other way around it.
And the other thing just to add in here is that I was actually stood at a lower elevation than what the lighthouse itself was stood on the rocks. So I'm effectively looking up to the lighthouse. I'm not looking down on it as if we were behind a ball. So I'm lower than the lighthouse itself on the rocks. That's a key thing when you're visualizing what we're looking at.
Yeah, technically, Anthony was standing at 34 to 50 feet, and the actual foundation of the lighthouse doesn't start until 84 feet. So there's still a variance there for sure. There's some other interesting things that when I modeled this, I found that became ever more obvious, and things that we don't see in reality. One is that to see this blue water curve away from you, both left and right, when you pan with the camera, right? So the curvature in the globe model, folks need to remember, is it's a sphere. So in all directions, you'd be standing on a point on a sphere. So curvature would be going, you should be looking over the horizon in front of you, to the side, to the left, to the right. And nowhere are we able to observe this curvature panning left and right, which is what's represented here. Like you would end up seeing that this is pretty much the 2.5 mile drop that you would see at 140 miles to any object in Ireland, right? So clearly it's flat.
Chris, what happens when we pan to the left and we start looking towards Ireland in terms of the curvature and the drop and the exponential bit?
It would be the same thing as you start panning left and right. I think I had I'm not sure if I had it in this one here or not, but all right, yeah, I did actually. So I'll put that on. So in the side view, this little dot here is, when I zoom way in, this represents, I put it in as 140 miles away in basically where Dublin would be. I think it's Dublin, yeah. Dublin's to the south, right? It just represents like a very high building, it's 120 feet by 120 feet by 680 feet high, which is pretty much representative of, there's a radio stack or a radio tower over there, some other things in Dublin. So at that distance, anything at that distance on the ball would be below this green line. And you can see that its drop, this 700-foot object, is actually 2.2 miles below sea level. So you would never ever see it. So the fact that you see anything in this last frame, when I actually turn off a wall of water. Right. So sorry, mine's not as contrasty as the one that Randy had done, but basically anything in this last frame, because we concluded that anything in this last year is beyond the lighthouse at Lagness. So all of this land here, in theory, on the global model, should be 2.5 miles behind the curve, and clearly it's not, because it's a straight line, flat line of sight to see this stuff. You're getting some refraction and whatnot, some miraging, but for the most part, flat and a long ways away. So that was my part. So,
Chris, what you've put together is amazing. I was in the live chat and people are just blown away by this, how much work all that must have taken you and how appreciated you are.
Well, thanks. I hope everybody appreciates it. I hope it makes sense, and it's an easy model to see, and how the ball and how I failed to reproduce it. I failed to reproduce the footage using a ball model. It's my failure. I can't do it. So, because it's flat.
You can't do the impossible.
That's right.
All right. So what should we talk about next? There's a little bit of talk about the inverted T to prove the end of the Isle of Man. I'm not sure if that's important to bring up. Anthony Riley, Sleeping Warrior, what do you say to that?
Slice Barkane, I really shouldn't have mentioned his name, but challenged me to a hangout recently. And one of his criticisms was that we failed to identify the lighthouse, denoting the end of the Isle of Man. And that's just not true. Ranty's got the lighthouse wrapped up completely. If Ranty wants to get that little that picture, we found a diamond in the evidence, and the diamond was just so pronounced when we saw it, we couldn't stop seeing it. You couldn't unsee it anymore. And it all came from some of the debates where we were being challenged and attacked by these ballers because they wanted more and more proof. And the more we started looking into it, the more proof we started to find. The more proof we started to find, the more it became obvious that we were seeing exactly what we thought we were seeing. And it became that obvious that when we got this this little diamond, Ranty started looking into it with the contrast levels and the forensic side to the thing that he'd created. And when he shows it in relation to the lighthouse, it's just it's a diamond with good. It's called a diamond for good reason. Are you ready to go, Ranty?
He's probably just getting it ready. I don't think he's dropped from our conversation.
Yeah, I'm just getting it ready now. 1 second.
Okay, good. And we're not talking about the diamond map at this point, just in case anybody's a bit startled by that.
There we go. I'm presenting now if you want to have a look. Yeah, I mean, you can absolutely make out even to the little building on the left here, sorry, on the right here, which is evidenced here. Or it's possible, it could even be this little triangle here, but the main thing is the shape of the lighthouse, absolutely. And you can see how even the buildings underneath are very prominent. It's under, I mean, even to this point here, where the coastline runs down and away, you can actually see it evidenced here. And this is the line of sight. This is actually the line of sight. So there's nothing misleading in this. This is exactly how you'd expect to see it from that distance. Well, not from that distance, but from this angle.
Yeah, it's very cool stuff. This is the bit that people need to focus on should they be interested in the debates or using the evidence if they want to debate somebody else. This is the main bit. And as Anthony called it, a diamond. Well, the reason it's a diamond is because without that, you couldn't prove that it's island behind. So the reason it's a 145-mile observation is because of this 51-mile observation of the lighthouse, because it's the last tip. It's the very last thing. It's on the very furthest edge that's visible from the line of sight. So it's the last thing of the Isle of Man, that lighthouse. And it's pretty much exactly the same height as Anthony's standing at. So you're seeing down to the beach. It's perfectly flat. There's no other word that can describe it. And, you know, there's other things that can be focused on and get bickered about on the island. But I think on the QED, the Earth is obviously an observably flat presentation. Chris summed it really beautifully. It's game over from the closest observable observation, and that's Morgord Lighthouse. So there's two distinct lighthouses. Morgord Lighthouse, which is about 31 miles, which is this lighthouse here. And this was pretty much the first major landmark that was identified. And it was identified by, do you want to say, Anthony?
Gem Panda.
So yeah, so a big baller, you know, flat earth hater, whatever you want to call him, anti-flat earth protagonist. He identified Morgord Lighthouse, and essentially, as Chris has just detailed, it's behind a 169-foot earth wall. So if you were on one side of a hill and you know your friend is on the other side of that hill, you physically cannot see your friend's house because there's a hill in the way. And in this instance, on the globe model, there's a wall of earth in the way that's 169 feet tall. So you physically cannot see this on the globe model. Therefore, we get into the nonsense talk about holograms and slightly looming this and refraction that. It's all nonsense. Basically, it's flat and we can see it, you know, and anybody with half a brain can say that they see this image. And if you watch the video, there's nothing particularly fantastic about the video. It's nothing revolutionary. Most people will recognize it as just normal stuff that goes on in their day-to-day lives, because what we observe on a day-to-day basis is a flat earth. So from that perspective, it's not going to win any photography awards. But because of the P900 zoom, you can actually bring details like Morgord Lighthouse, the closest observable landmark, into clear, crisp view. And it should be obscured. You know, we don't live on a globe. It's not obscured. That's the bottom line. But with that being said, and I'll round out the main point here, if the closest observable landmark should be obscured by Earth curve, everything left of that lighthouse is further and further and further beyond the curve of the Earth. So it's more and more and more and more in flat Earth favor as you go further left in the image, because it should be more and more obscured, but it isn't. It's just as clear as you pan left. You know, you can see things at great distances, like the other lighthouse at 51 miles. And this is the clincher, because that proves 145 miles to Ireland, you know, an obscene distance and verifiable by this diamond. It's just cool. I mean, we I don't know, hopefully we'll get chit-chatting about how this kind of progressed into this amazing proof, but we kept on calling it the gift that keeps giving, because every time we'd come across something new and identify it, or Ranty would phone up and excitedly point out a landmark that he'd really nailed down, it would be something that would come up and be contentious on their side, debated about, and every time it would be the same outcome. Well, it should be obscured by Earth curve. You know, it should be so way beyond what we should see that it should be impossible. So there was no winning arguments from their side, hence I say win-win. And the starting point, when we started debating this land that you can see along the top, the globe position was that we were seeing that this land was the furthest tip of the Isle of Man. And I don't know the exact height, but if it's 30 feet, it's, you know, there or thereabouts, 30 or 40 feet, say, in elevation. So essentially the globe side are telling us from day one that we have got a 51-mile observation down to 30 feet from 30 feet. You're like, what? So it's perfectly flat from the first debating point. And all that we've got from there on in, as we've examined it further and further, is more and more detail, you know, getting lined up better and better for the audience to see that we are genuinely correctly identifying the landscape that we're looking at on Google Earth. And this is the killer bit, because Google Earth is a completely useless piece of software for matching up any of these landmarks, because at any distance, it physically fans the Earth out to wrap it around a ball. And it in no way matches the real world observation that Anthony took with his camera. And this is what basically anybody can do on a daily, you know, on any clear day. If you can just stick your camera out the window, you can observe a flat Earth. And usefully, we've got this 33-mile long island that gets from Anthony's vantage point technically speaking, further and further and further beyond the curve. But with a good enough zoom and a clear enough day, you can see the Earth is flat. It's obvious.
Sadly enough, 33 miles though. Oh well.
It's riddled. The island itself is absolutely riddled with Masonic stuff. You know, it is a Masonic island. There's no two ways about that.
Interesting. Anything more about how the debates took shape that you want to touch on, Nathan or Anthony Riley?
Yeah, I'm going to share my screen for a sec, and I'm going to play a small, short clip. It's only for 3 minutes long. And what the point of this clip is that it's to show how tactically things started to play out. Now, this particular clip is Jeremy Watnabe, and what he's doing is he's identifying the lighthouse, the closest thing to us. And what he's doing is he's not telling us that it should be behind the curvature of the Earth. And what he is telling us is that we're not seeing down to effectively the pebbles on the beach. If imagine that there was a beach there, we're not seeing the pebbles down onto the beach. Therefore, it's not flat. So that's his position, but he's not telling us that the whole thing should be behind the curvature of the Earth. Now, this is snipped from one of the clips, one of the debates. I think it was debate 80. And what you're listening for is Jeremy it's only for 3 minutes, but it's Jeremy making his point, and then he's not telling us that there's curvature involved. And then you can hear that I spot it straight away. And the point of this clip isn't really to say, hey, look, I spotted it. It's more to say, look at the tactics and techniques that are now in play. Because we've got a baller that's not telling us something that's that is important. I mean, it's gone. This thing that we're looking at isn't there, but he's not telling us that. He wants to know why we can't see the pebbles. So I'm just going to play the clip and then switch my mic off, and then I'll come back to you at the end of it. So listen for the distraction and listen for how he pulls back on. It has been slightly edited to remove the wheat from the chaff so that you've only got the best, the most concise version that I could give. But this is one example of many occasions where we were distracted with nonsense and not being told about the curvature that we're supposed to live on. So for 3 minutes,
stop sharing for some reason.
For the next 3 minutes, I want you to just sit back and I want you to enjoy this magnificent spectacle and just enjoy it. It's only for 3 minutes and it'll be done. Can you hear that? Hang on, let me make sure that I've got my sound on.
I was going to say, can you share screen and sounds? Because we've got nothing.
We zoom in.
You can hear that, yeah?
Yes.
It's because of Snyder. So here we go. It's because of the Snyder. Sit back. Jeremy says, "Can I present my screen, please?" And then we go straight into it.
I'll show you what I
the only
found.
Reason.
Please. Great. I'm going to do a screen share if that's okay. If we zoom in, we can see this building here. So, which, you know, it's quite a distinctive building. It appears to be a tall, white tower of some description. And there's a sort of a white smudge off to the right-hand side. What could that be? A tall, white tower on a coastline? I suspect.
It's probably a lighthouse.
Lighthouse, yeah.
Lighthouse, right. So, you know, so I looked on Wikipedia for lighthouses, and I found one in an appropriate position. This lighthouse,
did you match
Head,
it up on Google Earth though?
I'm sorry?
Did you match it up on Google Earth to see does it match?
Yes, but I'll get to that. So this is the lighthouse that we're talking about. You can see the building up to the side there. We're at a sort of a similar sort of angle here because you can see we're looking down the coastline a bit there. Right, so in Google Earth, hold on a minute. Now I need to go to here.
I suspect that would be behind the curvature of the Earth.
How high is that right there?
Well, let's see. The distance from the top of the light from the top of the white part, which is where the light is, to the ocean is 80 feet. And when you look in Wikipedia, you find that that distance should be 233 feet, which means that you guys are missing, what's that, about 130 feet of cliff or something like that.
No.
33 feet
This is supposed
of cliff.
Jem,
we
this
can't
is not meant
see.
to be visible. It's
So
behind the
away
curve.
you go, guys. I'd like to know where the 133 feet of cliff is, please. Anytime you
Yep.
like.
That lighthouse
One
is
or the
meant to
other.
be 320 feet behind the curve of the Earth, according to your calculations.
Yep.
Were you listening to him, Anthony?
Did you just listen to what he did?
I did, but he's ignoring the first part. It's 320 feet below the curve.
Where
It's
was
about-
that in his presentation?
If the
He didn't present it.
if the conditions are favourable for refraction, all we're accounting for is about 150 feet.
Yeah, but Jeremy, can you put the refraction calculations on the screen so that we can see it? Because that's the bit you didn't do. So that's it. In a nutshell, that is it. So for those that didn't quite see what was going on while I knocked my screen off, stop sharing. So what Jeremy's done is he's presented the argument that is essentially where is the pebbles on the beach? And we realized that the whole thing should be missing. It should be behind the curve. But he's not told us that bit. He's expected us, and we're supposed to spot that ourselves. But if we didn't spot that that was not the case, and we went on arguing about the pebbles on the beach kind of thing, the whole point would have been missed. And this happened over and over and over again. I mean, we went for about 30 shows at 2 hours each time. And at the beginning, Nathan and I didn't really know how strong the evidence was. But as time began to go by, we had a physicist in, we had the rumpus in, and there was just occasion after occasion after occasion where once we got confident and more capable with the evidence, and we knew that we were able to start arguing and start punching these guys back, not just receiving the punches. Nathan and I became this team that it was like 2 onto like 8 of them at times. And we were taking them all on. I mean, in that clip then, there was Paul Voigt, there was Jeremy, there was Tony Vincenzo, or whatever his name is. And there was like 6 ballers in there. But it was very casual, very polite, very friendly, very, very early on. But the tactics that they were using to pull us away from the points that we needed to be making they were really quite sneaky. And we just had so many good occasions where we sat back and laughed afterwards. But as time went by, it just became pure tactics. Nathan, I mean, can you think of any of the key moments that you enjoyed the most?
My favourite moment was probably when they tried to use the top of the lighthouse. So, in essence, what they'd done is they'd spent days and days and days, and this still goes on now, trying to discredit Anthony's observer height. And in essence, all he'd done is taken a video and then after the fact gone, where was I? Looked on Google Earth and looked at the number it said. That's all he'd done. And the reason was simple, because he was testing Google Earth, because Google Earth is claimed to be their model. Now, after days and days and days of them saying that he's a liar and he's fabricated the evidence, he's made up his observer height, he's deliberately picked Google Earth because it's favorable. And there's been a million times when he said back to them, I'm just testing your model. I've just put in the value from your model. I'm just putting what it says from your model. You know, it went on and on and on. They eventually wanted to go to different sources for his observer height. So they started to go to the Ordnance Survey maps, which is fine if that's what they want to use. So they've got Anthony to agree, or I've basically let them have this evidence because they say it's based on geodetic surveying, therefore is representative of a globe, therefore is more accurate. So I'm up at my screen looking at this little ring that Paul Voigt's got up on the Ordnance Survey map, high resolution. He's got himself a 7-day trial or something, so we can have this super high resolution thing that's got a ring with a 40 on it. I'm like, fine, I think it was 40 meters. Great. That's what it says on Ordnance Survey. Wonderful. We finally got some consensus. Then we move over to the target, which, of course, is the nearest observable target, Moorgold Lighthouse. And it's like, right, let's see the Ordnance Survey map. They're like, no. What we want to do now is go to the Lighthouse Authority, because then they'll be listing the figure nice and high, the tippy top of the lighthouse. It's like, what are you talking about? Why do you want to go to the Lighthouse Authority? You've been days on these Ordnance Survey maps. As soon as we get to the things we're actually looking at, not an Ordnance Survey map in sight. And then when we do finally twist the arm into actually using the Ordnance Survey, they're using this leisure version of the Ordnance Survey, this really low-res version. And suddenly we're getting values on a scale. We're not getting the rumpus is, it's accurate down to the foot. We're not getting any of that anymore. It's like somewhere between this and this, maybe, if you squint your eyes and look at the map, and we're getting nowhere. But really what they wanted to do was focus on the nice high value, the top of the lighthouse. And we kept on having to say to them, well, it's not like all the other flat earth photography that you end up seeing, where the chances are, the refraction is such that you get the band of refraction with the tippy top of the lighthouse sat on the band of refraction. And then they do a bit of magic with their maths and go, it's exactly representative of what we would expect on a sphere. Imagine if Chris's depiction of it had literally got the tip of the top of the lighthouse on the water, it suddenly sits in a grey area. Whereas in this instance, it's not the top of the lighthouse we've got. We've got the top of the lighthouse. We've got the lighthouse itself. We've got the bottom of the lighthouse. We've got the foundations. We've got the ground beneath the lighthouse. We've got the shore. We've got everything. It's all there. And they want to argue we haven't got enough below the lighthouse. It's like, hold on, lads. None of this should be visible. And what's your excuse? Well, your excuse is your slightly looming non-standard refraction hyena holograms. That's their best excuse. And that got conflated very quickly into, so what you're telling us is you can see the back of your own head if you've got enough altitude and a clear enough day and a long enough focal length. And they're like, yeah, you can. We're like, that's nonsense. You've got to be joking. This is completely ridiculous. Essentially, on the globe side, you have to ask your audience, if you're a globe believer, to accept that something that is on the other side of a hill is being holographically projected up to sit perfectly on the horizon line in scale as it gets ever further over the curve. And you're like, what? This gets even worse when they started asking Ramsey, and this is asking Ranty about Ramsey. So they've all deserted us because they're losing every argument and making the globe look terrible with every single word that they utter. So at this stage, they start asking from this is the physicist. He starts asking from the chat, why can't we see the town of Ramsey? So Ranty suddenly has a eureka moment. Maybe you can fill in the details on this one, Ranty, because this was priceless.
Yeah, sure. So their entire argument on this image was that the entire landmass of the Isle of Man, including in the backdrop, which was Ireland, was now being loomed up 2.5 miles over the curvature of the Earth in perfect symmetry due to refraction. So that was why we were able to see the furthest points that we could, the lighthouse, Douglas, and obviously Ireland. So everything was being loomed up in perfect symmetry. However, then when we were being trolled maybe a week ago now, and we had the physicist, I think it was, who was baiting from the sidelines in the chat because they're on a boycott, you see. They won't come into the debate anymore. And they were asking, where's Ramsey? Where is Ramsey? How come you're not seeing it on the image? And it was all very jovial, and they were really working hard to. I'm getting an echo there. Sorry.
Ranty, do you want to put the Isle of Man pictures up so that they can see where Ramsey is, and where Ramsey's not?
Yeah, can you not the echo up? Well, that'd be good. All right, I better put the other image up. Actually, that'll be this one. So essentially, this is where are we? Ramsey is around about here on the map. Now you should be seeing a town in this area. I'll show you on Google Earth.
Got Chris's screen at the moment, just so you know. Maybe if you can take us there, Chris. You've got the composite up. We're seeing Chris's screen.
The map. All right.
There we go.
Who's sharing, me or Chris?
You're not sharing. If you can reshare.
Oh, right. Okay. Hang on.
Play some elevator music. There yet?
Why was I not sharing? Share screen. There we go. Right. So essentially, this is where Ramsey is, or should be, on the map. And their argument, their entire argument this entire time was that the entire island, so Ireland in the background, the Isle of Man, we've got Douglas down here, Ballacannel, all this was being loomed up, including the lighthouse here. So all that, because essentially this is where the, you shouldn't see beyond where the cursor is now. This is the the cutoff point, basically. So anything below that should be beyond the curve of the Earth. And the further left you go, the higher up that gets. So when you come down to, say, here, now the cursor should be here. So you shouldn't see any of this town. And the further you go, all this should be hidden. None of this should be seen at all. Nothing should be seen. And when you get down to the lighthouse, of course, you're up here somewhere, because that's 51 miles away. I mean, you're up here somewhere. Anyway, when we get to Ramsey, this was the point. This entire island was being loomed up by refraction. But then when he was trolling and saying, well, how come you're not seeing Ramsey? Why is Ramsey not being shown in this image? And then I had this thought. I thought, well, if the whole island is being loomed up and the whole island is being refracted up, yes, why aren't we seeing it? Because Ramsey is much, much nearer in regards to anything else. You know, I mean, the lighthouse is about the same distance away. So in that respect, yes, why aren't we seeing Ramsey? Where has it gone? Why has that not been loomed up too? And of course, then we realize the further north we go along the island, then we start hitting this refraction area, and we've got, you know, sorry, Ramsey's here. Sorry, I was mistaken. Then my mistake, I'll take it back. Ramsey is in this location. And obviously this is where we're starting with the mirroring. So we're getting some distortion in this area. So basically it's our position that Ramsey is hidden by the mirroring and the band of distortion that we get all the time when we're looking over water. You can see it here, this mirroring effect. You can see where the sky is being mirrored back up on the water. So if there was a boat here in this location, for instance, it would be drowned out by this mirroring effect. And it can be quite substantial. You know, I mean, you can get quite large bands of refraction. A typical evidence of that is when it curls back on itself here. So we know in the north, we are getting this refraction and this mirroring, and this is where Ramsey was. So it's our suggestion, well, our knowledge that says that it's being buried away in this layer of mirage. However, the south of the island, there is none. You know, when you scroll in here, you don't see that line. So we just actually had better weather down the south. So we were able to see on a clear day with no, you know, no mirage and effects going on, no mirroring, nothing like that. We could just see a lot further. And then it's obviously when you get right down to the far left, we do start to see a band start to take effect. Because obviously we're looking at over 100 miles of water. And yeah, so that pretty much nullified their argument, because if this part of the island is being loomed up due to miraging and refraction or whatever, and looming, then why was Ramsey not? Which would have been here. And we just say it's because we can't see it because of the dirty air that's here.
Got something to add, Anthony? I can hear you itching away on the mic.
Yeah.
He's probably better at explaining it, but
one of my favourite moments is when the rumpus came in, and dead proud as punch, he comes in and he says, right, I've done all the maths and I can calculate any building on this what's it called, this composite. And I was like, all right, okay, so can you tell us where such and such a building is? And we started to test this maths to see how reliable it was. And then we said, okay, I said, well, we're happy with that. That's okay. Let's now apply it. So let's go and see if we can identify the town of Douglas. And the Douglas town identification was really, really contentious, because what it effectively did was that if you had one town, the two town, or the third town, depending on which town you picked, altered the scale. It altered the parameters that you were seeing. So it was really contentious, and it went on for ages. So Rumpus comes in and dead proud, and he says, right, now I can see it. And Anthony, you don't understand this, so I'll talk you through it. And he spent 25 minutes talking about the maths, right? And I sat there biting my lip, I let him speak, and he got uninterrupted 25 minutes, right? So he starts to apply it to the picture, which is all I was interested in. I wasn't bothered about the maths. I just wanted to know what we're looking at. So he goes, right, and I can see this. And me and Nathan, we'd already realized that they were going to come back with us at this the day before. And basically, all we had to do was apply the curve calcs to it and see how much of it should be obscured. Whatever building they came back with didn't matter, because we had to see what the curve was and then see if it matched the evidence. and it would fall down on one of them two things, so long as we remembered to do them things. So whatever falafel they gave us, as long as we remembered them 2 points, we're all right. So Rumpus presents it, and he says, these are the 2 houses, and this is a farm, and this, that, and the other. And I said, okay, Rumpus. I said, I'll agree with you for the sake of discussion that you got these 2 or 3 buildings right. Kind of lines up with this tuft of trees, kind of lines up with these buildings over here. But if I agree these are all lining up, then you've got to agree that this bit over here is the limit of the land. And the reason why I was doing that was because I wanted to limit how far left the evidence could go, because it doesn't go indefinitely. It stops. And they were like, whoa, hang on a minute. What's going on here? So they knew that it was a gotcha, and they didn't want to agree to it. And I said, come on, Rumpus, you've said that these are the buildings, and I'm if you squint your eyes a little bit and look on a bit of an angle, then yeah, you could say that matches. But if you're going to have them buildings, I want this here as the limitation. They didn't want to concede it. So Rumpus actually then changed his position, and he says, I'm being, it was like a scene out of when you have the news reporter and they're being told something in their earpiece, and you can see that they start listening. And he says, I'm being told that I perhaps have miscalculated these buildings. So now he's backtracking. So not only is he backtracking against these maths that he's claimed fantastically that he could calculate everything, and how I didn't understand anything, he's now changing his position because somebody's told him in his earpiece or whatever that he's got it wrong, because they've realized that A, it didn't match the evidence, and B, there was no more land. So they were stuck. So it didn't work. So Rumpus then had to recalculate his maths. And this went on for weeks and weeks. This was like show after show after show. But me and Nathan had already sussed that all the land that we were talking about down the far side was behind the curve of the earth. So there were no buildings that they could pick out, because all of it was behind the curve. So Rumpus is now backtracking. And I've got him pinned to this point that he doesn't want me to concede. He doesn't want to concede it. I don't really want it, but he now thinks I want it. So it was a bit of reverse psychology. But I didn't really want it in the first place. So I'm saying, Rumpus, you can have all these, but I want this bit. And he's not doing it. So we had to backtrack out of it. And then it just coincided with the end of the show. But then the next show, we were talking about Ramsey, at the town of Ramsey, at Douglas again. And we were putting all the things back in place. But again, every time they come to a particular building, it was always behind the curve of the earth. And the further up the building, the further up the land mass that they go, the worse it became, because eventually they run out of land and there's no more buildings for them to pick on anymore. And it's just at that point when they started to realize that they were losing badly here. And they had a protest, didn't they, Nath? They all literally down tools walked out in the name of Nathan's moderating skills and Riley's lies and all this nonsense, right? Any excuse possible to down tools and walk out on, and they've not been back since.
Well, they have.
Nath, tell us about this.
Well, they've kept themselves from being openly on the show, but what they now try and do is make it seem like it's a boring conversation. No one wants to talk to us. So they basically joined just to snipe newbies out of the conversation. So it seems like we've got no one to talk to. In reality, this is a very, very small handful of people that we're talking about. I think they've dubbed themselves Troll Team 6 or words to this effect. But this group of people have decided that they will prevent conversation taking place on this subject, which is absolutely fine, because obviously it's at the point where literally they're up against the wall. They have no explanations for lighthouses at 51 miles that prove Ireland are behind. You know, they haven't got a good explanation for the lighthouse that's the closest. So, I mean, it's a really interesting image, the composite, because it's a tale of two different flat earth proofs. The right-hand side is pretty much the same as most flat earth photography that you've seen in the past, which is to say that there's a band of refraction that hides the bottom of stuff. That's the bottom line. And in this image, that's the closest stuff to us, which is just beautiful. You know, the closest stuff to us, the easiest observable stuff, just happens to be the stuff that is obscured by refraction. But the far stuff, the stuff that should be considerably further behind the curve of the Earth, well, that's the stuff we see clearly, because it's, according to Globe Earth, holograms. You know, it's being projected up. We can't really see this stuff. And this is the main point that I think a lot of people sort of lost sight of on the Globe side, the people that we were very insulting to and said, well, you're just slow. You don't understand what is necessitated to look at this image if you live on a globe. In essence, it doesn't matter which particular part we pick, but I don't know who's sharing, but if we go to, it is Ranty, isn't it? Yeah, Ranty, if you can go to the lighthouse at 51 miles, right? So go to, not Morgold, go to Lagness, right? If you can scroll along.
I can scroll along to this one, but this is the one that hasn't been able to bring it out until you adjust the
That's
contrast.
All right.
So
I've got a high
but you can
contrast.
actually still see the basic structure of it here. It's only when you adjust the contrast and the brightness that he was able to bring out the full image, which is here.
Okay. So what you are looking at now, according to Globe Earth, is a mirage. In other words, it's not really there. In fact, most of the landmarks down the left-hand side of this image aren't really there. You can't really see them. If you had a gun, you couldn't shoot at them. You know, they're not really there. They're just figments of your imagination being projected up, because obviously they sit on the other side of the curve of the Earth. In that bonkers world where that's what things do, you know, where your mate's house projects up above the hill occasionally, you know, these things don't really happen in our day-to-day lives. What we do see in terms of mirages and hologrammatic effects are detailed, very well detailed, you know, in terms of boats that look like they're levitating above the horizon, and they can be explained with refractive effects. But that's not Earth curve. You know, in this instance, unless you're going to argue that, well, we've definitely got Earth curve with the nearest stuff, but the furthest stuff is, yeah, that's holograms and refraction, and just happens to look considerably clearer than the stuff that has demonstrable refraction on it. And that's the bottom line. Anything that we say, well, this is obscured by dirty air, refraction, whatever you want to label it, it doesn't really matter. That stuff is the closest stuff. And it's the blurriest of stuff, as would be expected if you've got something interfering with your optics. But the furthest stuff, the stuff that's at considerably further distances, is pin sharp clear to the point where you can match it up on Google and get a really clear idea of what's what and where it is. And, you know, that's the funny part of the debate for me, because when you boil it down to what we actually did, all we did was looked at a video and identified things on it. That's it. That's literally all we did. And for that, we got porn bombed, doxed, phone numbers given out, calls at 3 a.m, harassment, you name it, we got it. And literally all we were doing was lining up landmarks on a picture that came from a video. That's it. That's all
Where
we were doing.
Where does this fear come from? I would say that everyone, including people who are hanging onto the globe, anti-flat earthers, as you called them, Nathan, they live a life where they value truth. They don't want people in the stores they go to lie to them or their significant others or their children. So why aren't they valuing something as clear-cut and true as this proof the panel has shown? Why are they rebelling against it with all sorts of obnoxious trolling? And as you were saying, phone calls at 3 a.m. and insults right and left. Why are they afraid?
Because it absolutely obliterates the idea of living on a sphere.
But why do they care?
Because they want it to. They don't want this to be a problem. And
but
it is
why does it matter to them? That's the thing. Why does it matter to them to... If I was shown something that were true, I'd say, thank you for showing me this new truth. It'll change my life. Why is their reaction to hate?
Well, at the moment, their reaction is to stick their heads in the sand. That's precisely what they're doing.
Still don't get it. I just maybe never will.
I think the reason why they do it is because when they're in this little close-knit community of ballers that believe vehemently that we live on a ball, that gives them a sense of purpose. And if they lack direction in their life in some aspect, and that's filling the hole for them, in other words, fighting the good fight in their mind, psychologically, that they're doing something good. Psychologically, they're fighting the good fight in the name of, like, it's like kind of religion. It's kind of like you're worshipping your God. And in this case, it's the ball. So it's kind of like Allah or God or whatever you worship to be God. For them, that's it. So they don't want that taken away. And there was a word used by one particular guy called jihad. And that was exactly what it was. They started fighting us like jihad. It was so personal. For a long time, it was so personal. There is no real explanation for it other than it's something not quite straight up there. The reality is the Earth is flat. There is no curvature to it whatsoever. You might get a little bit of refraction on the horizon, and that obscurity is what they claim is the curvature of the Earth. But it isn't. You can see it in the photos. You can see it in the evidence. It's not curvature we're seeing. A little bit of mirroring on the horizon. That's it. But this goes way beyond that, so far beyond it that they can't even argue it. So it takes them out of the comfort zone. It puts them into a place where they think, hang on a sec, I don't have a purpose here anymore if the Earth's not a ball. I'm going to lose all my ball of friends. We're not going to have anybody to troll. That's not a comfortable position if you think that we live on a ball. And I can only think it's psychological.
Maybe on a bigger level, it also says to them that they may have to look into other aspects of what they've been told about the way life works. Big questions about the pharmaceutical industry, about if there is any validity to chemtrails, and on and on and on, vaccines, et cetera. We know all these things. Maybe this is just one of those things where if I open Pandora's box and admit the Earth is not a globe, then I've got to look at all that other stuff and maybe reevaluate every single thing I do with my life. And that's just too much work. I want to stay exactly where I am right now. And with my friends will make a difference. I don't see how horrible comments, sexual comments, disgusting comments in a chat and thumbsing down something in their minds will stop this truth from rolling forward.
I just want to show one last moment of glory. In that scene where Nathan was talking about the heights that they wanted to use the Ordnance Survey for, because the height was significantly different to Google Earth. And obviously they argued that Riley lied. And as Nathan points out, all they did was put the value in on their model. They'd found the Ordnance Survey had a different value to it, and it was in their favor quite a lot. So obviously they wanted to use this, but only on one side. They didn't want to use it on the other side. But Nathan was like, no. If you're using it on that side, you're using it on that side as well. That works both ways, right? So in the conversation, Nathan innocently dropped the question, so is Ordnance Survey based on a flat Earth or a flat map, or is it based on a spherical Earth? And that's a fair question, and nobody knew the answer. So whilst these are all like intermingling with whatever point that they're on at the time, I thought I'm going to go and see if I can find it out. So it gets onto Google, Ordnance Survey, is it based on a ball? And basically what they've done is they've said that the Earth, their words are, quote, we appear to live on the Earth is described as an apparent spheroid, or words to that effect. But they didn't say we live on a spheroid. It said the Earth is described as, and I thought that's an interesting phrase. So basically what they do is they take the spherical nature of the Earth and they flatten it and they cancel out the curvature and put it on a flat map. That's what they actually do. That is their answer. So I'd come back with the answer. And basically, Paul, this self-proclaimed physicist, he's arguing that it doesn't mean, the word that they used was the word reduced. Now, we all know what the word reduced means, but Paul didn't want it to be the case that they've now got a flat map that's arguing their case, because it's a paradox, right? You don't want to be a baller and you're arguing for the shape of the Earth based on a flat map. You want to be doing it based on Google Earth because that's spherical in nature. But they can't possibly accept the possibility of using an Ordnance Survey map that is, by their own definition, reduced back down to a flat plane. So it gets into this argument about the phraseology that they're using. And it came down to the interpretation of the one word, the word reduced. And literally, Paul wouldn't accept it. So in the end, I had to get the word reduced up on Google for him, and I presented the actual definition, which we all know. And Paul still said, no, Anthony, that's not what it means. And I'm like, Paul, you've got it on screen. So it became an absolute joke. So we were sat back, and me and Nathan had just realized that Paul had lost it. And we're just sat back with our feet up at this moment, laughing, because Paul's got himself into a corner now where he literally looks stupid. And me and Nathan just sat back smiling, laughing, giggling. And we're now at the point where me and Nathan are that laughing that much and we're that confident with what we're doing that it becomes a joke. So me and Nathan are literally relaxing. And now all the ballers, all the flat earthers are coming in and joining the panel and just sitting there just to enjoy the show, because they must have noticed that there was a paradigm shift from, well, we're not quite sure how strong this is, to it seems to be quite strong. And now we've got them. So these guys don't know what they're doing. And we actually got them over and over and over again to reject the association with Google Earth in that 2 points. That's not our model. They were all saying that that's not our model. It's just a representation of our model. And they were then saying it's not even accurate. By their own words, it's not accurate. So they don't even have a model. They've dejected that, and they accept that they don't use that as a model anymore. So we can send them all over to Jeremy and to Paul, who will gladly correct them that they don't have a working model. And if the model that they do have, or this representation, is miles out with regards to the elevations, it becomes useless because that's their model, but they don't accept it anymore. So now we're in this position, me and Nathan, where we've got all these ballers angrily telling us, but it's not our model. And it was just glorious. Me and Nathan have got them cornered in such a way that they couldn't wriggle out of it anymore. And we just sat back and enjoyed it. And then we got to a point towards the end where this amnesty or this protest was still going on. And we realized that we don't even have to debate this anymore because they can't debunk it. It's that seriously far that they can't get away with bendy lighter and all this nonsense. So we just took our foot off the gas and just started to enjoy it and started to troll them back. Now the shoe's on our foot. So we're in the strong position. And honestly, the roundabouts that we went through as we were working our way through this, it was so worth it in the long run.
We have this now on this platform. I mean, I've got a little over 12,000 subscribers as of the date of this show. And I know that's not a lot compared to many channels. On December 19th, 2018, January 19th, 2018. But this needs to be seen by everyone. What can we do next? Carolyn Gutman-Day in the live chat was suggesting there needs to be a press conference. Now we know the press is not our friend. Does anyone here have any idea how we can get this out to a bigger and wider audience?
I hear Mark Sargent's got beer since he's returned.
Yes, he has come into this chat a couple of times and also shared the promo for this on his channel. So hopefully this needs to go, I don't want to say global, it needs to go plane wide. That's for sure.
I mean, I think to try and answer your question, there's been several people in the comments that say, well, why haven't you contacted Nature magazine? Why isn't this on the BBC? Why isn't this here, there, and everywhere? And the simple answer is, well, I and several other people have contacted the press. Now, that's not to say that the press are going to immediately pay attention unless it's got some momentum. Well, how do you give something momentum? Well, you share it, you talk about it, you discuss it, you bring it up with other people. And it's all about people, I think, understanding what it is, because it's unique in the respect that, as I've said many times, there's a usual type of flat earth evidence, and it is usually riddled with refraction. And that refraction is normally co-opted into curvature. So you end up with most of the images being sort of tossed back and forward, and they end up being a grey area. There's nothing else like the Lagness Lighthouse at 51 miles with Ireland behind it at 145 miles. And when that starts to really sink in, because we're still talking about it, and I don't know, I'm happy to say this now, I think we're all in agreement amongst ourselves that we're going to start to put our tools down in regards to the Isle of Man. The only thing that's left in contention is the contentious bit, the bit riddled with refraction. And for us, we just say, well, we can demonstrate that there is refraction there. For them, they're having to say the whole island's a hologram. So, we can evidence refraction, but that's the only bit that's contentious. And it's easy to ignore when it's the closest bit. And there's a comparable distance landmark in the form of Morgold Lighthouse, which you can start doing curve count measurements on. You can see it really clearly. And most people are aware you don't get the same weather everywhere. It's completely varied. So the fact that there is a varying amount of atmospheric blocking and refraction, that's normal. That's what you would expect. But it is exceptional that Anthony's day was so clear as to see how flat it really is. And how flat is it? Well, completely flat. There's no other way to describe it. You can't stand at 30 feet and see a lighthouse that's stood on 30 feet perfectly unless it's completely flat. There's no other way to conceptualize it unless you want to believe in holographic projections that are only necessitated by a wall of earth curve that isn't there. That's the bottom line. I think once people start to actually recognize just how good a flat earth proof it really is, they'll start using it themselves. They'll start saying, well, what about the Isle of Man? What about seeing Ireland at 145 miles? What about seeing Lagness Lighthouse at 51 miles? What about Morgold Lighthouse at 31 miles? None of this stuff should be visible. And it all is. You see it. There it is.
I just need to put a little bit of context in as well, because there were two guys, and I'm going to name them because there's a little bit of sleight of hand going on. They've got Miles Davis and Al Kay. And they both went up on a road trip to the location and stood in the exact place that I stood. And the argument that they were going to try and disprove Well, they were going to try and argue about the observer height because it really doesn't make any difference when we're seeing as far as we're seeing. It doesn't make any difference because you've got to be like the Kirch-Belief, basically everything that's all that height. But Miles Davis and Al Kay went back to debunk me, but I knew that their visibility was not going to be good enough to see as far as what I saw unless it was an exceptionally clear day, and I knew it wouldn't be. So I was able to predict what they would come back with, or most importantly, what they would not come back with. And they've come back. They've not released their evidence because it damages their position, because they weren't able to see as far as what I could see. So they couldn't see Ireland, and they were there all day, and they were trying and trying and trying. But what they actually did was like George Airy's failure. They went out to debunk me, like George Airy's failure did, failed to debunk it, and they've not been able to prove that they could see Ireland as well. But rather than say, hey, we couldn't see this, probably was Ireland, they've just kept it quiet and hoped that people forget about it, shoved it under the mat. But now we're at the point where we're keeping saying, come on, present your evidence. We want to see what you got. Now, we know what they're going to get because the visibility wasn't quite as good. But the reality is they're not releasing the evidence. But can you imagine if I had kept hold of evidence that didn't go in my favor when they all knew I was going out to do something? They'd be calling me a liar. But for some reason, these guys are not being called a liar. It's being swept under the mat and hoping that it'll go away. Well, it isn't going to be going away because we know that you've got evidence that doesn't support your position, boys. We'd like to see it because that's the honest position to do, even if it damages your position. Now, it appears that they didn't get the same depth of field that I got because I had an exceptionally clear day. They did have a good day, but it wasn't as clear as my day, and they just couldn't see it. But they've kept it to themselves. And that speaks volumes because that's dishonest. Yet when I get told that I'm stood in a position or whatever, the reality is it doesn't make any difference whether I was at 35 feet, 40 feet, 50 feet, 100 feet, 150 feet. They need 4,000 feet. Yet they're making a big deal about my integrity and saying that I lied and I was dishonest. They're not mentioning anything about Miles and Al Kay going back and doing their observation and they're not revealing the information. How honest is that? It's not acceptable.
Can I just intercept there and just make a couple of points on a couple of things? Is that the video has been up now for several weeks. We haven't hidden that. It's not been edited in any way. And it's basically been played. It's from start to finish. So you see from when the camera turned on, started recording, to when it turned off. Also, the composites have been up. So we haven't hidden these. Obviously, if people wanted to do their own composites from the video, they could download that. It's up in high definition. So we haven't hidden anything about this, and we've had an open platform on Nathan's debate show where we can openly invite both flat earthers and ball earthers to come in, put an argument across, whether it be the Isle of Man or whether it be just in general about another observation or refraction, or maybe some of the work that some of the ball earthers are doing. And it's a great platform, as I say, to actually debate the opposition side. Nathan did put a video up before that kind of made fun about the type of people we sometimes get on, because sometimes don't get some very nice people on. In fact, for the most part, we don't. But we allow it because ultimately it shows the passion on both sides. And sometimes in that passion, you sometimes hear something that registers with you, and you can apply it to your own observations and try to find out, what did he mean by this point and how can I prove it? So it makes you a better, it makes you better in your results, because ultimately you're taking the criticism and you're turning it around and working on it and then coming up with an answer and formulating it. And this is how we are progressing from our end, because we aren't sitting still. We're learning every day. And if you're in your own echo chamber and you're not listening to the other side, you're never going to understand the other side, and you can never win a debate with the other side. So congratulations to Nathan. I'm glad that we're now all working together. I hear that there are other people working together too, like FE Core, and they'll be doing some work too. I believe Chris is a member of that. Maybe he wants to say something about that too, and perhaps some of the modelling work that he's been doing.
Yes, indeed, Shane Ranty. I want to bring Chris in just to ask him how sure he is that the modeling that he's done is. How certain are you that we can see Ireland when we see both models?
Well, I'm sure within a foot, basically. It's when I modeled and laid out the lighthouses, and like all the lighthouses, Mockholden, Lagness, everything, I triangulated them using trigonometry to a foot. Their elevations are correct, so it's within a foot of accuracy on this model, and the Earth is as well. Like even when I modeled it on the ball surface to see where things should be, so it's accurate to within a foot of accuracy. And if anyone, feel free to repeat it. It's not hard to do. Just design yourself a ball.
Your model allowed us to see the wall of water that wasn't visible before.
Yeah. Well, that's it, right? We have to keep in mind that when you're positioning a camera on a ball, you got to go backwards to your target and then try to look through the water. Like you actually have to fall back on the ball and then look through the water to see what it is that used to be in front of you, because you're traveling around a ball. And so once that sinks in with people, it's kind of hard to deny that. So I think as far as what can we do is just to be patient. It's taken 200 and some years for this ball thing to be installed in the minds of the masses, and it might take another 200 to get out of it. But if we're just patient and keep disproving it, say it's not standing up to scrutiny, and once you debunk the wall of water in front of you, you go on to the next thing. Does the core work? Is Copernicus's model correct? Aries failure, you just keep going down that line of what else doesn't hold up, right? Obviously, it's not spinning, right? Copernicus still has epicycles. You can just keep on trucking, and the whole thing falls apart, right? So that's with FE core and stuff. That's a lot of the experiments that we'll be doing is not just on because it's not flat Earth core. It's a field engineer core group of field engineers, and we will be testing Lake Balaton with a laser that will fire 67 kilometers across a lake and look for any curvature, diffraction, refraction, developing new formulas and algorithms to apply to flat surfaces.
Thank you very much, Chris. And that channel that Chris has, you don't have a lot of subscribers, but then again, you're working with many other people, but it's Chris Monkseely, Seelye. And I also want to thank Ranty, ! It's Shane Cook for being here. I definitely appreciate you. And also just you being a really nice person, and your kindness has been shown to many, myself and Nathan included. And of course, Sleeping Warrior, Anthony Riley, thank you for being here. And Nathan Oakley, the Flat Earth Debates on the Nathan Oakley 1980 channel. In the description box of this video, there will be links to all of those channels, and I do hope you subscribe to them and keep up with the Flat Earth Debates on Nathan Oakley 1980's channel. And I do have a final word. In the live chat, we've seen some horrendous comments from people who are holding on to the globe. And I don't know, because I don't really go into very many debate shows that are debates that are anti-flat Earth. But when I haven't seen flat earthers going in with the disgusting profanity. And that says a lot. There's a lot of fear here involved. And so, in a way, I feel sorry for those who feel they need to troll this way and to try to hurt other people with words. But words can't stop truth. So this concludes this episode of Flat Earth and Other Hot Potatoes, QED. I'm Patricia Steer. Thank you very much. Give the video a thumbs up, share it on social media, and come back when it's rendered to YouTube and leave a comment about anybody on the panel or for anyone on the panel. And until we meet again, keep it flat.